Hey everybody, so I'm here on this absolutely miserable day at the start of September in Washington. This is the turning of the season here, and I haven't made a video in like 3 or 4 weeks now, mainly because I've just been swamped with work. You know, I've been out on the mountain a whole lot, and if I'm not out on the mountain, then I'm back at home organizing gear and getting things ready for next time I'm out on the mountain. So it's just been a really hectic few weeks of guiding, and I've been neglecting my duty to make some videos for a while, but now I'm back and hopefully I'll have a couple videos out for the next few weeks and get back into my regular schedule of posting a video every week. So this one I wanted to do a quick subject about rappel extensions. Now, rappel extensions are actually quite useful and very nice to use on multi-pitch rappels or any sort of multi-stage sequence rappels. And I wanted to talk about different materials you can use for making a rappel extension, as well as how to actually make them, and then my personal preferences for which extension I would use in a different circumstance. So let's just hop right into it and start with talking about the materials for rappel extensions. So there are kind of 3 different types of materials you can use, usually rappel extensions, you have your multi-purpose slings that you can use for a rappel extension, as well as some sort of personally or specifically made products like the the Petzl Connect Adjust, or I think they also have like the Petzl Duo Connect Adjust or something. I don't know, they have such weird names for their products. But that is a specific rappel rig. Another very common thing is this PAS system, personal anchor system. This one's made by Black Diamond, but every company makes their own version of this in some way. Now, as far as different actual materials go, you have Dyneema, which everyone knows is this thin little thing, and then nylon, which would be something like this. Now, they do have other materials that are kind of like a blend of the two, but generally when it comes to rappel extensions, nylon is the preferred material. This is what I prefer to use, but a lot of times when I'm like alpine climbing and I'm not using this for really too much, and it's also more lightweight and more compact, so that way it packs down easier, I'll use Dyneema for my rappel extension a lot of times in alpine settings. And I'll explain to you the different ways how I use this and the different preferred anchor or ways how to make my rappel extension out of this material, which I sometimes will switch up depending on the rappel. I'll generally go to something like this, which is a big link system. It actually kind of, like when you incorporate tying the knot into this sling, this actually gives you a little bit more extension than most standard slings for rappel anchors. And I'll use this for more technical rappels, like usually rock stuff, when I'm going from hanging belay to hanging belay. And this just gives me a whole lot of adjustability with all the different links in the chain. And I'll explain how I like to use this in my rappel extension, but this is kind of one of the this is what I'll go to in those very technical descent. Alright, so first couple of extensions I'm going to talk about involves the nylon runner that I use in most of my rappel extensions and most of the time when I'm rappelling. And so I'm going to talk about the first couple of ways you can tie an extension on yourself with this material, and I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of each extension. Alright, first way I like to do this is I find the bone, and then I go a few inches past that, and then I have my harness right here. You can tie it around the belay loop if you want. That's perfectly fine. I personally don't do this, just because that's kind of not what I've ever done. But as long as you remember to remove the extension after every time you're done rappelling for the day, as well as to check your equipment regularly, like you should anyway, then there's nothing wrong with that. Me personally, I like to thread my extension through my hard points, going up through the bottom, then up through the top, and then because I have that bone so close, I just take the long end and put it through the short end. And then you can see how I can keep the bone outside of my girth hitch, and then it's also out of the way of the rest of the extension. So that's just where I like to put it, so that way it's out of the way. Now the most common extension I do is I go about 6 to 9 inches past my harness, and I take all 4 strands and fold them over, and then I just tie them all in an overhand knot. There we have, gives me a point right here where I can clip my ATC to. I swear I have an ATC somewhere on this harness. And there we have it. And so what that does is it extends my ATC past my harness, and now I can clip my third hand onto my belay loop instead of on my leg loop, which is a little bit better practice. It helps keep the harness all aligned. It is ultimately just better practice to do that. And then I also have my extension right here, which I can clip to my anchor when I'm at the next anchor, and I can unload everything and load it back up once the rope is ready to go for the next rappel. So that's generally my most preferred anchor. It's the one I kind of go to the most. And it does have a few drawbacks, like the extension doesn't give you as much extension on other anchors as other personal anchor systems. But I do like really having this isolated knot for my ATC, as well as if you hook this back to your belay loop, then you can see how this whole anchor is actually redundant, because by virtue of this knot, if this gets cut, you have this backing you up. And then on the inside, you have 2 separate loops which make the ATC connection redundant. So if redundancy actually in rappel tethers isn't really a huge caveat anymore. I mean, you'll see some rappel tethers that actually aren't redundant that I show you in this, and those are widely accepted by industry professionals as just fine. Keep in mind that most redundancy in climbing is for equipment and materials that we don't own, such as bolts already in the rock. We know what our material has been through in this setup, and we know that it's trustworthy, and so redundancy kind of takes a back seat to other things. All right, another extension that you can do starts again with your double length sling girth hitched into your harness. And I'm going to go about 6 to 9 inches up, and I'm going to tie an overhand knot just in the entire sling. There we go. And you do want to make sure that that knot is nice and clean. Take your time tying it. And what that does is, again, it just creates another point to clip your ATC onto, as well as it gives you this loop right here that you can use to clip yourself into the anchor. Now, the big advantage of this setup over the last one is that you get a lot more extension to your anchor. So if you have big rappel ledges that you're going to, or really blocky terrain, then this is a nice thing to do with your anchor setup. The one thing is that you can see it's not redundant, which again I just explained why. It doesn't really matter a whole lot that it's not redundant, but if redundancy is something that really matters to you, you can make it redundant by simply clipping both loops on either side of the knot. So you take this loop, which I'll clip, and then this loop right here. There you go. And then just remember to clip your extension loop back to your belay loop. And then now it's redundant, because if this gets cut, that knot makes the other loop, makes both loops independent of each other, and so you have this one backing you up. And that's a way how to make this extension redundant while still getting all the longer principles of, or by use of this knot. Another rappel extension that I will use starts with my sling. And I'll thread it up through bottom loop and the top loop again. This time I'm going to meet both the ends. You can see how there's nothing tied right here. We call this a basket hitch in climbing. And again, I'm going to work the bone way down towards me. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide my hand down and tie this whole thing in an overhand knot. There we go. And so same deal as before, it makes both these loops redundant, and it makes both these loops redundant right here. But what this does is it gives you sort of a more focused master point to clip your ATC onto. Now this anchor isn't really the most useful when you're in a multi-pitch setting, or like, you know, doing multiple hanging rappels, because it kind of doesn't give you an extension to clip onto the anchor. But this is really nice for rescue systems like a counterbalance rappel, while and any sort of rock rescue systems, as well as crevasse rescue systems. This is kind of nice because you want to extend your ATC to be able to use your belay loop, but you don't really need the extra clip-in point as if you were going from anchor to anchor. Another thing is you can still hook your third hand on, because obviously your ATC is extended. And also I'll use this sort of setup usually when I'm just doing a single rappel, where I would still want to extend my anchor and probably still want to put a third hand on, but I'm just doing like one rappel to the ground. So another reason why I would use this anchor is when I'm using different material like Dyneema, and that's because when you have an anchor like the first couple that I showed you, a lot of times if you have it backed up and this were to break on you or get cut or whatever, you have a little bit of extra fall and shock loading that's set up right here. And so that's better on more thicker, more stretchy, like nylon material. I mean, it wouldn't be really that bad with the amount of extra space I have here. It's really not that much, but with the carabiner it kind of adds a bit. Whereas if you do use this material that doesn't stretch or shock absorb as much as the other static material, to get it straight, they both don't shock absorb really well at all, but this material is a little less forgiving than this. And so if this segment gets cut, I have an immediate straight backup right there. And so a lot of times if I'm using Dyneema slings, especially for the context that I would use this extension in the first place, then I'm going to tie them like this. And this is I usually only use Dyneema slings to rappel, as rappel anchors when I'm in an alpine environment, again, because they're small, they're lighter, and they pack down smaller. And also I'm not exactly planning on using them a whole lot, and so I'll go to Dyneema like this, and so I'll end up using this rappel anchor. Especially since alpine climbing, they give you a lot bigger ledges to work with, and you can be a bit more free with being clipped into the anchor. So that's another reason why I would go to this type of extension, is the type of material I have. Another type of extension I've been doing recently, and I've more or less been just playing around with this, but instead of tying a knot like so and leaving it for, you know, a bunch of rappels and then it being kind of hard to undo, I've just been playing around with this. But some people like to actually clove hitch themselves in where they would tie the knot, and then they hook their ATC in right there. Yeah, and then they have the full extension properties of tying a knot in. You have the redundancy aspects of it, because we know a clove hitch is just as strong on this side as it is on this side. And then you also have the added benefit of the clove hitch maybe being a bit easier to loosen up after multiple rappels. And so some people have been moving more to that. I kind of have been just playing around with it a little bit on certain rappels. Just something else to add to the video. I mean, like, feel free to experiment around with it and see what you think about it. Alright, so the last extension I'm going to talk about is one of these pre-made extensions. I don't really have too much to talk about this because everyone kind of already knows how to use it, but take the big loop and pass it either through your belay loop or up through your hard points. And now where I like to extend myself out on this thing is right on the first loop. I find that that distance is just perfect, and I can have my third hand right here, as well as I can have whatever link attached to my carabiner for the anchor. Now again, this isn't redundant setup right here where you're connected with your ATC. If you really want it to be redundant, then all you have to do is go one loop up. If you can see it right there, yeah, go the next loop up and clip that, and then clip the loop above that. Just make sure you get it through 2 loops, and then you can clip the end back to your harness. And now you can see if this one breaks, you have this one backing you up, which is connected back to a hard point on your harness. So that's a way how you can make this whole extension redundant. Me personally, I really like it just being right here at the end of this loop. And I think that that's a really good size for me. All right, well, there you have it. That's just a base number of Rappel extensions to work with. Again, you sort of find which one you like the best. And I kind of go to like the first one I showed like 90% of the time and only use the others if I have a reason for it. And so that's just sort of how I happen to operate. But one thing to make sure is just know your material and know the shock loading value of your material. Use it correctly and get training by a professional before you try using this stuff, and then maybe you can hear what their thoughts are and what their preferred extension is and what their reason for their preferred extension is. You know, there's a couple different ways to extend your anchors out there, and even though I talked about the extension itself not being redundant, be sure to always be clipped into a redundant system. Like if you have 2 bolts connected by a quad anchor, you can clip your redundant Rappel extension into that anchor, and then it's redundant by virtue of the quad attaching it to the wall. And if you want more information on that, I can make another video sort of explaining the thought process on that. But other than that, you guys have fun climbing. The season's kind of wrapping up here in Washington. Who knows how many more weeks of good climbing we have, but I hope you all get out there, and then I'll see you in the next video.